Hello, this is Chef John from foodwishes.com with pan-roasted chicken breast. That's right, it's come to my attention that some of you, even many of you, are overthinking chicken, which I do not advise. In fact, when it comes to chicken, as well as, pretty much everything, including life, it is generally a better strategy to underthink versus trying to do too much. So keep that in mind as we go through this very simple tutorial. And we're going to start off with one of the main challenges to doing this dish properly, using the right kind of chicken breast. Because ideally what we want here is a boneless but skin-on chicken breast, which are really hard to find at the store. Generally our choices are boneless, skinless chicken breast, which as you know I'm not a big fan of. Or you can get these which are called split breasts, which are skin-on, but still have some of the breastbone and rib cage attached. So what we're going to do is use these and turn them into exactly what we want. And like any of the boning you've seen me do in these videos, the technique is exactly the same. Find and feel where the bone attaches to the meat, and by simply using a sharp knife pressed against the bone, angled towards the bone, angled towards those ribs, not the meat, we can fairly easily cut that away. And this is actually easier than I'm making it look, because mostly I'm trying to not block the camera with my arm. But I'm simply cutting a little at a time, angling the knife towards the bone, not the meat. And it's really not too much trouble to cut that right out. And once we've successfully sliced off that rib cage and/or part of the breastbone, there's one more thing to check. In the top of the breast, the fatter end of the breast, you want to feel around because often a piece of the wishbone is still in there, which I can feel right here. So I'm going to use the tip of my knife and just cut that out. And then last but not least, once we have it deboned, if we want, we can remove that chicken fillet, also known as the chicken finger, which is that strip of meat sort of attached to the breast by a thin membrane. And more often than not, I just leave that on there. But the breast does cook a little more evenly if you take it off. And of course, those are great to freeze and then use to fry up for chicken strips. And at that point, you're free to do any kind of random trimming you want. And once that's been completed, we can go ahead and season these up and start cooking. And this technique produces such a flavorful chicken, you really don't need a lot of seasoning. Salt is mandatory, though. So I'm going to very generously season both sides with kosher salt. And then just because I saw it sitting there, a little bit of freshly ground black pepper. And believe it or not, that's it. At this point, we can head over to the stove and start our pan roasting. So what I like to do is heat olive oil in a heavy-duty skillet over medium-high heat until it's nice and hot and starts to shimmer. And we're going to place our chicken breast in skin side down. And we'll just let that sear on medium-high heat for about 5 or 6 minutes to get a really beautiful crust going on that skin side. And yes, I do need to level my oven. My oil is kind of settling on one side, which is not ideal. Although I'm not really sure if that's the oven or the house, or it could just be San Francisco. I don't know. And by the way, while we're waiting for that skin to crisp up, if you do happen to have any fresh herb around, I like to sprinkle a little bit on this meat side. So I had a little bit of tarragon around, because that was going in the dressing of what I'm going to serve this over. But a little rosemary would also be nice. Some thyme. Oh man, that would be really nice. And like I said, we're going to let that sear for about 5 or 6 minutes, at which point we will flip these over and reduce our heat to medium. And then all we're going to do is let that cook on medium until it's cooked the rest of the way through. Almost. Ideally, I want to serve this with an internal temp of about 155 to 160, but I want to start our pan sauce when it reaches 150, so we can kind of finish the chicken in the sauce. And if you've done a lot of these, you can go by feel, but I do recommend you use a thermometer. It's much safer and more accurate. And once we've hit that target temp, or you're pretty sure they're just about done, we'll finish up in a very primitive but effective sauce. So I'm going to toss in about 2 tablespoons of any kind of vinegar. I'm using apple cider vinegar today because I'm going to serve this over an apple salad, but anything's going to work. And we're also going to toss in a couple tablespoons of cold butter and swirl all that together. So what we have in here is the olive oil that we started with, plus we now have rendered chicken fat and butter and vinegar. So really the sauce is going to be nothing more than 3 fats and an acid. And while that would be the worst barbershop quartet name ever, it really does make for a fantastic pan sauce. And all we'll do is kind of toss that around until our butter's melted, at which point, assuming the chicken's done, we can turn off the heat. And in just a few minutes it took us to make that sauce, your chicken has probably gone from 150 to 155, which I think is ideal. Perfectly safe, yet still juicy and moist. So let me go ahead and switch to a spoon so I can do the old gratuitous spoon the sauce over the chicken shot. From not one, but 2 different angles. As I ask the rhetorical question, how good does that look? And it's probably worth noting that you can easily switch out the oils and the fats in this, the spices, as well as the vinegar or acid you use. And this technique will still work exactly as shown. So long story short, I just showed you like 1,000 recipes. But anyway, that's it. our perfect pan-roasted chicken's done. And other than the very obvious check for seasoning, we are ready to eat. And normally I would serve that up next to some mashed potatoes or rice or pasta, you know, the usual array of evil carbs. But this time I decided to slice it up and serve it over a Waldorf salad. And while I do enjoy this with the traditional sides, there's something about that combination of that hot buttery chicken over that cold, crisp, sweet salad that really is amazing. And that's just not any Waldorf. That's my famous celery root Waldorf, which I will be showing you how to make in the next video. So stay tuned for that. But enough about the salad. Let's get into that juicy, perfect pan-roasted chicken. Just so moist, so flavorful. I mean, if I knew how to eat on camera, this would have looked perfect. And in case you're wondering, no, I'm not adding any kind of moist, juicy chicken photo filter on this. That's what your chicken's going to look like if you cook it with the skin on and don't overcook it. You're going to get something that's so moist, so juicy, so flavorful, your friends and family will hardly believe you made it. No offense. But this technique really does work wonders. So anyway, that's it. Just a quick little tutorial on how I like to pan roast chicken. Like I said, stay tuned for the Waldorf salad recipe. And in the meantime, I really do hope you give this easy and incredibly delicious technique a try soon. So head over to foodwishes.com for all the ingredient amounts and more info as usual. And as always, enjoy. Honey-Brined Southern Fried Chicken Breast. So we're going to attempt the impossible, a delicious Southern Fried Chicken using boneless, skinless chicken breast, which is insane. All right, so here is what I did. Step one, we needed to make sure the chicken breasts don't dry out. So we're going to do a brine, which you'll read about on the post, how this works. But it's water, cold water, salt, and honey. Now, if you want to do the boiling water and then let it cool and put some ice in it and all that kind of stuff, go ahead. I don't bother. Salt will dissolve in here if you stir it. I waited a couple minutes, stirred it again. How did I know it was dissolved? There wasn't any at the bottom. All right, so I mixed that up. I added 2 boneless, skinless chicken breasts. Those are big ones, okay? Very voluptuous 8 ounces. Now, those are under the surface, but I want to make sure, so I'm going to weight it down with this plate. By the way, that reminds me, I need olives. I'm going to cover that with plastic. We're going to let that sit in the refrigerator brining for 1 hour. 1 hour later, take it out, drain it, dry it very well with paper towels, and then just enough buttermilk to coat it. What makes Southern Fried Chicken so high calorie and high fat is mostly the skin and a thick breading that soaks up lots of oil. So the game plan here is a very, very thin coating. We're going to let the chicken sit in the buttermilk at room temperature for 15 minutes. I'm going to make a seasoned flour, ingredients on the website, of course. I got some garlic and onion salt, some black pepper, some cayenne. I know what you're thinking. That's a lot of cayenne. No, it's not. All right, we're going to give that a mix. The chicken breasts have been sitting in the buttermilk for 15 minutes. I'm going to dredge those in the flour. All right, make sure it's coated extremely well. It's got to be totally coated, caked on. All right, put it on a rack and let it sit out for 15 minutes more. All right, that may seem minor, but that is an important step. It has to sit out 15 minutes resting. So when we're ready, we're going to go over to the stove. I have my vegetable oil at 350 to start. You put the chicken in. The temperature is going to drop to about 300, 310, somewhere in there. And that's where it should stay. So I'm going to keep my heat at about medium, just a hair above medium. And that should do it. Now the big challenge here with doing a boneless, skinless chicken breast with that thin of a coating, I was terrified that the coating was going to be totally burnt and black before the chicken cooked. Because this chicken's going to take, 12 to 15 minutes to cook through. So here I'm turning it, and I was thinking, oh, that looks pretty good. Okay, that worked. Very good. Kind of excited. And then I realized I turned it too early. So I stuck the thermometer in. It was still only reading like 100 degrees. I was like, oh no, what am I going to do? By the way, check out this technique I've perfected where I don't focus on the big thing in the front. I focus on the little thing in the back. I think that's pretty, cutting edge. So at this point I realized chicken's not done, but I have to turn it over because the other side would get black if I didn't. So I turned it back over, something you're never supposed to do. You're only supposed to turn fried chicken once. But you know what? We're using boneless, skinless chicken breast, so we're breaking all the rules. All right, so that looked really good. I was happy with that. I was just praying it would cook before the other side burnt. All right, one of the breasts was a little smaller. That finished first. I went with an internal temperature of 155. It's going to raise a little bit as it sits. And there they are. We're going to let those cool at least 5 minutes. So at this point, I was thrilled. The coating stayed on. That was my first fear. It didn't get too black before the chicken cooked through. That was my second fear. And then my last concern, which is, the most obvious, could a chicken breast, without the skin, without the bones, taste good? The proof is in the proverbial pudding. I cut into that thing, and it was absolutely perfection. The brine, that honey brine, kept the chicken incredibly moist. As I already mentioned, what makes a fried piece of chicken high fat, high calorie, is usually the skin and a thick, thick coating. Well, we don't have any skin, of course, but look how thin and crisp that coating is. It was just perfect. So is this going to compare to a traditional Southern fried chicken? Of course not. But if you're looking for a way, way lighter version, this is it. I mean, that thin coating can't physically absorb that much oil. So that's the key here. And even though the coating was really thin and it was in that hot oil for almost 15 minutes, the brine kept it really, really, really juicy. So I was really happy how this turned out. And of course, I know some of you were thinking, hey, where's the gravy? Who needs gravy when you have spicy orange chicken wing glaze? So anyway, even if you don't fry it, that brine was really nice and ultra simple, like 2 ingredients. That would work for roasted, grilled, baked, broiled, whatever chicken you want to do. Anyway, I'm going to stop the eating fried chicken torture and tell you to give this a try. Really, really, really good. Lots more information on the site about the scientific process of brining, like a sentence, along with all the ingredients as usual. And as always, enjoy.
New and improved chicken Parmesan. That's right, anybody can improve a recipe that actually needs it. But I'm not into that. I prefer to rework recipes that everyone thinks are already perfect. Like, for example, chicken parm. And while I'm not going to lie and say I don't like the classic version, because I really do, but what I don't love about it is the way it's usually topped with a thick layer of rubbery, bland mozzarella cheese. So I don't want to spoil the surprise, because we're going to get to it. But believe it or not, this chicken parm is going to be 100% mozzarella free. So stay tuned for that, but in the meantime, let's go ahead and prep our chicken. And what we're going to want to do is pound our boneless, skinless chicken breast between a couple layers of plastic. And my strategy here is to get the whole chicken breast the same thickness as this thinner, pointier end. So all that means is we're going to do most of our pounding on this thicker part. And this is not a game of strength. Okay, so don't be too aggressive with this. We just want to use enough force to gently flatten that out. So we'll keep pounding until we think it's reached a fairly uniform level of thickness, and then we'll stop, because that's all we need to do. So that's looking pretty good right there. And I went ahead and did that to 2 breasts. And in case you're curious, what happens if you are too aggressive and completely smash the end of one of the breasts? Don't worry, it's not a problem, because once this stuff is breaded, it always looks perfect. So don't obliterate those edges on purpose, but if you do, it's not a big deal. And then once those breasts are prepped, we'll go ahead and season those up with kosher salt and some freshly ground black pepper. And then, of course, we're also going to want to bread these, but not using the classic 3-station method. What we're going to do instead, after these have been seasoned, is sprinkle over and press in the flour right on this plate instead of dipping this in a separate dish of flour. We'll just go ahead and sprinkle it over and press it in, and then we'll turn those over and do the exact same thing to the other side. Salt, pepper, and flour, and then we'll press that in to make sure both sides are well coated. And one of the advantages here is we're only using the flour we need. Or if you use a separate dish of flour, you're going to have to throw away all the extra. In this way, we're basically just using what we need. And then because that works so well for the flour, we're basically going to do the same thing with our egg wash. So what we'll do is we'll brush off some of that excess flour, and instead of cracking 2 or 3 eggs in another dish, we will simply beat 1 single egg and pour that right over the chicken on the plate. And then using our fingers and or pastry brush, we will make sure all that flour gets coated with our egg wash. And I realize it looks a little weird and kind of messy, but bottom line, we're only dirtying 1 plate. Not to mention probably using less flour and egg. And by the way, in hindsight, we probably should have brushed off the excess flour off the plate also. But nonetheless, this still worked out very well. And then what's going to happen after those breasts have been floured and egg washed? We will transfer those into some plain dry breadcrumbs. And yes, I can see that little spot of flour that doesn't have any egg. Let me fix that. There we go. And I'll go around pressing a little bit up on the edges before sprinkling some crumbs over the top. And then I think you know the rest. We will make sure both sides are covered completely with those crumbs and that they've been pressed in firmly. And if you are going to fry these immediately, you can go ahead and leave them on that plate. But if, like me, you're doing these a little bit ahead of time, I do like to transfer those onto a clean plate. I guess to prevent clumping, but mostly because it looks better. And at this point, we can go ahead and refrigerate that until we're ready to fry. And you know what? I think I'm ready. So what we're going to do is fry these in about a ½ inch of olive oil, set over medium-high heat, and please make sure your oil is hot enough before you put the chicken in. If you start to put yours in and the tip hits that oil and it doesn't start bubbling like this, don't go any further. Let it get hotter. But assuming your oil was properly heated, we're going to go ahead and cook these for about 2 to 3 minutes per side, or until crispy and golden brown. And be careful when you flip them over. See, if you just grab the edge like I did, you could rip off some of that coating. You see that? But anyway, like I said, we're going to cook those about 2 to 3 minutes per side, at which point we will remove those to a foil-lined baking sheet and proceed with the new and improved part of the program. See, normally at this point, this would be topped with our tomato sauce and then covered with very bland, rubbery mozzarella cheese, but we're not going to do that. We're going to make our own custom cheese mixture featuring creamy and delicious ricotta cheese, fortified with the tangy sharpness of cheddar. And then besides our 2 cheeses, we'll also give this a little pinch of freshly ground black pepper, as well as some cayenne. We all saw that coming. And then we'll finish up with a little pinch of salt and just a tiny drizzle of olive oil. And then we'll take a spoon and mix that up. And what I was attempting to do here is simulate that beautiful creamy goodness of a fresh mozzarella, which is generally creamier, tangier, and significantly less rubbery. But it can be pricey and sometimes hard to find, so many people end up using that thing from the supermarket that looks and feels like a baseball. So that's really the stuff we're trying to avoid with this technique. If you're already doing your chicken and veal parm with beautiful fresh mozzarella, you could just keep doing that. That's delicious. But anyway, we're going to go ahead and give that a mix. And once that's been accomplished, we'll go ahead and top our chicken. So I divided that mixture up between the 2 breasts and kind of spread it out a little. I didn't want to go all the way to the edges, but I also didn't know how this was going to melt, so I didn't just want to pile it all up in the middle. But I think next time I won't spread it out quite as much, so we leave a little more of those crispy crumbs exposed. And if you're wondering why I didn't put sauce down first and then the cheese, I think this comes out better if you just top with the cheese and not the sauce. I mean, we're going to have plenty of sauce on the plate, so I really don't think we need that extra layer of sogginess under the cheese. And then once our cheese mixture has been applied, we're going to finish this off with a nice dusting of real Parmigiano Reggiano. I assume everyone has read the recent articles online about the non-real Parmesan containing sawdust, as I've warned you about in the past. So unless you're part termite, use the real stuff. And then for a final touch, we'll give those tops a little drizzle of olive oil. And once that's set, we'll go ahead and place these in the center of a very hot 500-degree oven for about 10 to 12 minutes, or until that cheese is melted and the chicken is cooked through. And hopefully when it comes out, it looks something like this. And then some good news, we don't really have to let this rest. By the time we plate this up, it will be fine. And speaking of plating this up, I made a huge rookie mistake. You never want to cover the whole plate with the sauce, because all those beautiful crispy crumbs on the bottom of your chicken are going to get soggy. So instead of a pool, you really want to do a ring, which I've simulated graphically with this white circle, because I didn't notice my mistake until the video was done. In related news, I did learn how to make a white circle in Premiere. But anyway, I went ahead and transferred that chicken onto my sauce and finished it off with a little bit of freshly chopped Italian parsley. And my new and hopefully improved chicken parm was done. And notwithstanding my pool of sauce issue, I really thought this came out incredibly well. All right, all the classic components of chicken parm are here. The crispy cutlet, the delicious sauce, but instead of a thick, bland, rubbery topping of mozzarella, we have our customized cheese blend, which gives us all that beautiful creamy goodness of mozzarella, but is way more flavorful and the texture far superior. I mean, when people try this and see how good it is, they might just start replacing mozzarella on pizza too. Who knows? I mean, did we just inadvertently destroy the mozzarella industry? I hope not. But if so, they had a good run. But anyway, that's it. If you are a lover of the chicken and or veal parm, then I really hope you give this alternative version a try very soon. So head over to foodwishes.com for all the ingredient amounts and more info as usual. And as always, enjoy. Chicken Kiev. This is still one of the most delicious chicken recipes in history, and this is how you make it. So step 1 here, we're going to make some garlic butter. And to do that, I'm debuting my brand new olive wood mortar and pestle. Oh, she's a beauty. And into it, I'm going to add 2 small or 1 very large clove of garlic that's been chopped up a little bit. We'll also give it a big pinch of salt to help it grind. And we're going to go ahead and give that a thorough smashing, which these things are perfect for. Although the bottom wasn't quite flat enough, so I put this underneath. But anyway, we're going to smash that garlic, and once we do, we're going to go ahead and add some chopped Italian parsley, or as the Italians call it, parsley. And we'll give that about a 1-minute pounding. And at that point, we're going to put in some butter.
And we'll go ahead and pesto that until it's thoroughly mixed. And once it is, your garlic parsley butter is done. And sure, if you don't have one of these, you could just chop the parsley, chop the garlic, mix it into the butter. But this is so much better. You're going to get a much sharper, stronger, more intense garlic flavor. You're also going to beat up that parsley enough to let some of the chlorophyll go into the butter, which is going to give it a glorious color. And once our butter is thoroughly mixed in, we're going to go ahead and transfer that onto a piece of plastic wrap, and we're going to pop it in the fridge to firm up a little bit while we prep our chicken breasts. And there they are. I have 2 breasts, and we're using some nice sized breasts. Those are about 8 ounces each. And yes, this will work with smaller breasts, but using larger breasts will increase your chances for success. And by the way, if they come with that little tenderloin, that little chicken finger attached, go ahead and pull that out. They should look just like this. And then what we're going to do before we fill these is pound these out. So we're going to place that what was skin side down on the plastic. And then we'll put another piece of plastic over that, and we'll take our meat pounder and pound that out pretty thin. I'll say about 1/4 inch just to give you a measurement, but it might be a little thinner than that. All right, you just don't want to break through is all. So we're going to pound that out, and it should look something like this. And then before we stuff that, we're going to go ahead and season that up with some salt and freshly ground black pepper. And once that's seasoned, we're going to go ahead and take half our butter and place that right in the center of that slightly wider end of the chicken. In fact, let me turn this so it's easier to see. So the butter goes in the center of the wider end of the breast. And then what we're going to do is take this longer, skinnier piece and flip-flap it over the butter. Yes, flip-flap is an official culinary term. But we're going to use that flap of chicken to fold over and envelop the butter. And then we'll gather up all the edges like this. And that's going to trap that butter in the center. And if you follow the rest of the steps correctly, that will not leak out. And by the way, we're not trussing this. We're not using skewers. We're not using toothpicks. So we're going to trap our herb butter in the center of this all naturally with no performance-enhancing fasteners. So gather that meat up like that, which is going to give you a smooth top and a very rugged bottom. We're going to place it on the plastic like this, and then gather up the edges of the plastic, and we'll give it a little twist. Not too tight, just enough to keep it all together. And then we'll place that on a plate, and then all we need to do is pop those in the freezer for about a half hour until they just start to get firm. We don't want it frozen solid, we just want it frozen enough to hold the bottom together. So even though the sides might still feel kind of soft, where we gathered all that meat together on the bottom should be frozen firm enough to bread. And of course we're going to use the classic 3-station breading system. First we're going to dredge it in seasoned flour. All that is flour with some salt added to it. And then after it's been thoroughly dredged in flour, we're going to go ahead and pop that in an egg wash, which all that is a couple beaten eggs. And then once it's been thoroughly coated with the egg wash, the last stop is this bowl of panko breadcrumbs. You could totally use regular breadcrumbs for this. That's actually more traditional. But I do like the panko. A little sharper, a little crunchier, a little more multifaceted. But anyway, we're going to go ahead and bread that in panko. And when we are positive it is thoroughly coated, we're going to go ahead and place that back on the plate on top of a few extra breadcrumbs. And we're going to go ahead and pop that back in the freezer for exactly 15 minutes. We want these to firm up just a touch before we fry them. So pop those in. And that's going to be the perfect amount of time for you to heat up your oil, which I'm officially going to say is 350, even though I didn't wait. Mine was like 300. I'm a little impatient. By the way, next to your oil, you're going to want a foil-lined pan, because after we fry these, they're going right in the oven. And then once our oil is up to temperature, and our chicken's been in the freezer for 15 minutes, we're going to place that in seam side down. And we're going to let that fry just like that for 1 minute exactly. So after 1 minute, go ahead and flip it over. And we'll leave it on the other side about a minute. All right, we're not cooking it in the oil. We're just sealing it and starting the crust. And don't be scared. Some of those seams might open up just a hair. It's okay. The butter's not coming out. And then we're going to pull it out, let the excess oil drain, and pop it on a foil-lined sheet pan. And we're going to finish these in the oven. But before we do, I want you to sprinkle a little extra salt on top. I think I heard that keeps the top a little crispier. I don't know. And then we'll just mark our territory a little bit here with a shake of cayenne. And at that point, those are ready to go in the center of a 400-degree oven for exactly 15 minutes, if you're using the same size chicken breast I am, or until they look like this. Check it out. They should be beautifully golden brown. And we'll talk about testing done this on the blog. It's a little bit tricky because you can't cut into this. And then we're going to let those sit resting for 5 minutes. This is critical. If for whatever insane reason you cut right into these, you might see a tiny bit of pink here and there. But as they sit and rest for 5 minutes, they will finish cooking perfectly. And at that point, you can transfer this onto your plate. And if you're thinking, hey, you forgot the sauce. No, I didn't. You forgot it was inside. So I'm going to take a fork and knife, and what you are about to witness can never be unseen. Check this out. One of the great sights in all of chicken cookery, that gorgeous chicken breast, crispy on the outside, moist and tender within, And of course, that amazing herb garlic butter just pouring out, running over everything. Just truly unbelievable. So I really do hope you give this a try. Head over to foodwishes.com for all the ingredient amounts and more info as usual. And as always, enjoy. Chicken Piccata, one of my favorite chicken dishes of all time, and it actually means chicken prick, believe it or not. Prick is in poked with a spear, and it's actually a sort of a metaphor for the sharp, intense sauce. So anyway, here's how we start this easy and pretty quick dish. All right, I'm going to take 2 boneless, skinless chicken breasts. If you're using the small ones, a 6 ounce, don't bother pounding. But I have these pretty big chicken breasts here. These are about, I don't know, probably 10 ounces at least. So I'm going to pound those a little bit between plastic. About a 1/2 inch thick for me is about perfect. We're going to season generously with cayenne, salt and pepper, of course. All right, once these are seasoned, we have to dredge them in flour. People, please stop dredging chicken in giant pans of flour, and then you have to throw all the flour away. If you're just doing a couple breasts, use a plate, sprinkle some flour on it, place your chicken down, move it around a little bit, sprinkle some more flour, and once it's coated, you're good to go. Why waste all that flour? And yes, one of my chicken breasts broke in half while I pounded it. Stop laughing. It's not funny. All right, doesn't affect the recipe though, don't worry. Alrighty, chicken's prepped. Heading over to the stove. Heavy skillet on medium-high heat. Couple tablespoons of olive oil, not extra virgin. I'm going to shake off the excess flour from the chicken, and once that oil is hot and starts to shimmer a little bit, I'm going to put the chicken in. And if it doesn't bubble like that when it hits, if it doesn't start sizzling, it wasn't hot enough. Let your pan get hot. I'm going to turn it down to medium and cook these for about 4 to 5 minutes per side. Of course, this is going to depend on the thickness of your chicken. So play it by ear, but we're going to brown it on both sides in the olive oil. All right, and when it's cooked through, we are going to remove to a plate and reserve. Now, time for the delicious piccata sauce. I'm going to leave the pan on medium heat. I'm going to place in my capers. And here's a cool little trick. Take a fork and smash about half of them in the pan. This is going to release a lot more of the flavor, and I really think it makes a difference. After the capers sizzle in that oil for about 30 seconds, I'm going to dump in my white wine, which of course is going to deglaze the bottom. I'm going to boil that for about 2 minutes until it reduces by half. It's not going to take long. As soon as the wine is reduced by about half, dump in your lemon juice and a little splash of water, and then cold butter that I cut in chunks. And yes, you're thinking, that's a lot of butter. Well, the reason for that, this is a butter sauce. All right, so it's fine. We're going to turn the heat to as low as it goes. We're going to keep it moving until the butter's melted. I'm going to throw in some beautiful fresh parsley. I'm going to put my chicken back in just to heat through. It's only going to take like a minute because they, just came out of the frying pan about 5 minutes ago. And as soon as those are heated through, you are done. You should have a beautifully emulsified lemon wine caper sauce. We're going to put the chicken on a plate. We're going to spoon over the amazing piccata sauce. Oh, and by the way, let me save you some trouble. Don't ask me what to substitute for capers. There's no answer. All right, I'm going to cut into this, and I'm going to thoroughly enjoy it. The chicken, tender, moist, that sauce, sharp but not too sharp, just bursting with flavor. So anyway, there it is, chicken piccata. Super simple, super easy. I think you should give this a try, and I think you should put this in your permanent chicken rotation, and I think you should make it at least once every 10 days. Now, you typically see this served over rice. Here I'm serving it with some leftover asparagus souffle and roasted red peppers. Trust me, it tasted way better than it looks, because you know what? That doesn't look too good, does it? But it was really delicious. Anyway, check out the site. All the ingredients are there, as usual. And as always, enjoy. Chicken Marsala Milanese. That's right, I usually only try to improve recipes one at a time, but here we're going to do 2. Right, we're going to make chicken marsala better by doing the chicken Milanese style, and we're going to improve chicken Milanese with the same amazing marsala sauce that goes on chicken marsala. And I am very happy to report the results were incredible. So with that, let's go ahead and get started by pounding out some boneless, skinless chicken breasts between 2 pieces of plastic, or in my case, a zip top bag that I cut open. which, yes, is a little wasteful, but I really do enjoy the luxury of working with the thicker plastic. And what we'll shoot for here is something about a 1/4 inch thick, but more important than a measurement is getting this where the fatter end of the breast has been flattened to the same thickness as the thinner end. And then what we'll do once that's been accomplished is go ahead and season this on both sides with a mixture of kosher salt, freshly ground black pepper, and cayenne. And I know a lot of people like to add the seasoning to the flour, and they call it a seasoned flour, but I don't trust seasoned flour. I never have and I never will, since I want to see and feel exactly how much seasoning is going on the meat. So I do it this way. And then once I had my poultry pounded and seasoned, I'm going to go ahead and dust it with flour, which I like to do by sifting it down like this. And then what we'll do once we're sure both sides have been coated with flour is transfer that to a clean plate, but save the plate we floured on, since we can just brush that off and use it for our breadcrumbs. And that's it once floured. The next stop on this breading adventure would be to coat these with egg, which I'm going to do right on this plate with the help of a pastry brush. And once I've poured about 2/3 of it on and brushed it over evenly, I'll go ahead and flip those over and then brush the excess from the plate and whatever else I have left over onto that second side. And I'm going to keep brushing until I'm sure we have 100% full coverage. And then you remember that plate we saved that we did the flouring on? Let's go ahead and grab that and shake over a very generous amount of panko breadcrumbs. Okay, at least a 1/4 inch deep. And then what we'll do is transfer our floured and egg chicken into our breadcrumbs, letting any of that excess egg drip off as we do. And once we have those placed down and nicely situated, we'll go ahead and cover the top with an equally generous layer of panko, which by the way can just be regular fine breadcrumbs if you want. I believe those are probably more traditional, but personally I do like the extra texture and crunch you get from the panko. And then what we'll do is go ahead and press those fairly firmly into the chicken before we flip them over and shake it on a little more in case there's any wet achy spots that haven't been crumbed. And then once that's been accomplished, we can move on to the final, possibly optional step, and that would be to grate over a relatively light dusting of Parmesan cheese. Oh yeah, the real stuff, Parmigiano Reggiano. And once we've grated over as much as we like, we will go ahead and press that into the crumbs. And then we'll turn that over and do the exact same thing to the other side. And besides adding some obvious flavor, the cheese is actually going to make our coating a little crispier, and I think just generally better. But like I said, it is optional, so you decide. I mean, you are after all the Jay-Z of your chicken Milanese. And then what we'll do once our breading's been cheesed is go ahead and transfer that to a clean plate that we sprinkled just a few breadcrumbs down on. And then we will wrap that in plastic and keep it in the fridge until we're ready to pan fry. And then once that's in the fridge, we can move on to make our mushroom marsala sauce. And that will begin by tossing some thickly sliced mushrooms into some melted butter in a pan set over high heat. And we'll also toss in a nice big pinch of salt, at which point we'll cook these mushrooms stirring occasionally until they are very nicely browned. Okay, that's going to be important for the flavor and the color of the sauce. And you know the drill here. When these first start, they're going to be kind of wet and watery as the salt will draw out moisture. But because we're on high heat, that's going to quickly evaporate and the mushrooms will start frying in the butter. And before you know it, you're going to get some beautiful caramelization. And if everything goes according to plan, about 5 or 6 minutes later, you should have something that looks like this. And once we're happy with those, we'll reduce our heat to medium, and we will sprinkle over and then stir in some flour, just to sort of toast that starch a little bit. And yes, if you're keeping score at home, this counts as a roux, R-O-U-X. And then once that's set, we can go ahead and pour in the other star of the show, besides the mushrooms, and that would be our dry Marsala wine, as well as, if you want, and I do, a couple teaspoons of lemon juice. And we'll go ahead and stir that all together, scraping our spatula along the bottom as we do. And as you can see here, that's going to thicken up very, very quickly. But don't worry, there's more liquid on the way. And we're only going to cook this for about a minute, at which point we can transfer in our chicken broth, which could be a nice homemade one, or it could be the kind I used here. And what we'll do besides stirring this in is raise our heat to medium-high, and we'll wait for this to come up to a simmer. And while we do, we can also add a little bit of freshly ground black pepper and possibly a shake or two of cayenne. And then all we need to do once this comes back to a simmer is let it cook and reduce, stirring occasionally, until it's exactly as thick as we want, which if we're in a hurry, we could just do by staying on medium-high. Or if you want, you could reduce the heat and do that a little more gently and slowly. Right, that is just you cooking. So whatever you're comfortable with. But anyway, I let mine simmer down for about 10 minutes or so, until it was nice and thick and rich and beautiful looking. And believe it or not, that is pretty much it. We can go ahead and grab a spoon and double check it's exactly how we want it, which this was. And if it is, we can turn our heat to low and just keep it hot until we're ready to use it, or let it cool and reheat it later. And then if you want, right before we serve this, I like to stir in a little bit of freshly chopped Italian parsley. And of course, we're also going to definitely want to taste it for salt. And that's it. Once our sauce is set, we're down to frying our chicken, which I'm going to do in a generous amount of olive oil set over medium-high heat. And for filming purposes, I'm just going to do one, but you can do as many as you can fit in a pan. And if you're doing a whole bunch, they do actually hold fairly well in a warm oven. But anyway, once we have that in the pan and it's sizzling nicely, I like to back the heat down to medium so that our breading doesn't get too dark and possibly burned by the time the inside's cooked. And as far as time goes, this thing's pretty thin, so we're only going to need about 3 minutes per side, give or take. Oh, and you're only supposed to cook each side once. But once my second side's browned, and I think my chicken is just about cooked, I like to flip it back over to the first side for another 30 seconds or so, since I have a theory that makes it a little crispier. All right, I can't prove it, but I think it does, and that's good enough for me. All right, when you're cooking, always follow your intuition. And that's it. Once we decide we're done, we'll remove that to a paper towel-lined plate, and then we'll quickly plate it up, next to hopefully an arugula salad, maybe one that has some fresh garden tomatoes and some shaved Parmesan. And we'll spoon over a generous helping of that amazing mushroom marsala sauce, which is amazing on like 1,000 different things. But out of all those, maybe this is the best thing. And I finished up with one last pinch of parsley. And that's it. Our Chicken Marsala Milanese is ready to enjoy. And I wish this video wasn't so long already, because I could have taken about 5 or 6 minutes just eating this and explaining how amazing it was, since it really is mind-blowing in both taste and texture. Okay, we have that crispy, buttery, perfectly cooked chicken cutlet with that incredibly savory marsala sauce, which even though we use a dry marsala, still has a nice amount of sweetness to it. And when you add in that little acidity from the lemon juice, it really is an absolutely perfect combination with the earthiness of the mushrooms. And I cannot think of a more delicious thing I've eaten in a long, long, long time. In fact, when I cooked the second one and served it to Michelle after I'd finished filming, and I asked her how it was, she didn't even answer with words, she just made noises. The kind of noises people only make when they're eating something this incredible. Oh, and this time this was no mere prop salad. Okay, the reason arugula is usually served with a chicken Milanese is because those bitter greens, especially tossed with an acidic dressing, really helps cut through all that richness, and it refreshes your palate and gets you ready for the next few bites. But anyway, that's it. What I'm calling Chicken Marsala Milanese. All right, I've wanted to update our Chicken Marsala recipe for a long time, and for some reason I've never actually done a Chicken Milanese recipe. So I decided to save time, I would do them together, and I absolutely loved how this came out, which is why I really do hope you give this a try soon. So please follow the links below for the ingredient amounts, a printable written recipe, and much more info as usual. And as always, enjoy.
Firebird Chicken. That's right, usually when I steal a dish from someone, I steal both the recipe and the name. But this time that is not the case. Alright, the original Firebird Chicken is actually a stir fry, and quite a bit different than what you're seeing here. But I absolutely love the name, and thought it would fit perfectly for this very simple, extremely spicy, and incredibly delicious dish. And hopefully one day this becomes so popular that people think that other recipe got its name from me. So with that, let's go ahead and get started by adding 1 very large sliced garlic clove to this mortar, along with 2 seeded, roughly chopped habanero peppers, which also in the store sometimes go by the name of Scotch bonnet. And then we'll also toss in a spoon of salt, at which point we will proceed to smash this into a fine paste, which by the way can be extremely dangerous, as while you're pounding, some of the juice from that pepper could splash up into your eye. So I do suggest you use some kind of protective eyewear. Alright, some safety glasses, or reading glasses, or even sunglasses, which not only will protect you, but as everybody knows, there's no cooler look than wearing sunglasses indoors. But anyway, the point is smash this down to a paste without burning your eyeballs. And once that's been accomplished, we will add the last 2 ingredients. So to our fruity, ferociously fiery fresh peppers, we will add the non-fresh fermented funkiness of a bottled hot sauce, which for me is going to be sriracha. but please use whatever you want. And then last but not least, believe it or not, we're going to add 1 large egg. And we'll grab a whisk and give this a thorough mixing. And not only is this going to act as a marinade, but it's also going to form the base of our coating for the chicken. Oh, and by the way, since we're going to apply this to the chicken once it's prepped, we can finally answer that age-old question of which came first, the chicken or the egg. It's the egg. But anyway, once that's mixed, we'll go ahead and set it aside and move on to prep a couple boneless, skinless chicken breasts. And by prep, I mean cut into 3 pieces. The first of which being that tenderloin, or finger as it's referred to. So we'll go ahead and peel/trim that off. And then what we'll do is sort of find that seam where the tenderloin was, and we'll place our knife in right about there, cutting from the smaller side to the larger side at about a 45-degree angle. And as I finish this cut, I have no idea why I angled the knife that way, creating one of the worst and most irregular cuts I've ever produced. Alright, I think I was looking in the viewfinder instead of paying attention, which is of course my standard excuse. So please let me show you that one more time. Alright, so first we'll remove that tenderloin, which pretty much peels away on its own. And then we will find that seam and slice from the smaller side towards the larger side at about a 45-degree angle. And then this time finish to cut straight through. Okay, that was a little better. And then what we'll do once that's been cut up is generously dust both sides with some kind of starch. Okay, I'm using rice flour here, but you could use regular all-purpose flour, or even cornstarch if you want. Okay, they're all going to serve about the same purpose. But personally, I think the rice flour does the best job. Plus, I have a whole bag of it, and what else am I going to use it for? But anyway, you decide. I mean, you are, after all, the Tim Curry of what's about to become a slurry. And speaking of horror shows, once those pieces are well coated with our flour, we can go ahead and pour over our pepper and egg mixture. At which point we will take our tongs and toss these pieces until they are completely coated. And I said completely. Make sure you get every nook and cranny. And no, it might not look like the most appetizing thing ever at this stage, but you'll see once we're done pan frying this, it is going to look absolutely gorgeous. Even that horribly cut misshapen piece. But before we can pan fry this, we need to wrap it up and let it marinate in the fridge from anywhere between 2 and 12 hours. And in case you're keeping score at home, I did mine for about 3. At which point we can go ahead and fry that up in a nonstick pan, set over medium-high heat, into which I put a generous splash of olive oil. But any other kind of vegetable oil would work, or any melted fat for that matter. Or a clarified butter would work, as would some good old-fashioned chicken fat. But anyway, we will place that in and cook that for about 3 minutes per side, or until beautifully browned and just cooked through. And if you see any small spots that don't have any of that slurry, you can go ahead and transfer on a little more with your tongs from the plate. And as you might expect, those smaller pieces will cook faster. So generally those will be the first ones we turn. And of course also the first ones removed from the pan. And you know what, I have to say, that oddly shaped piece is starting to grow on me. It actually turned out to be kind of cute. But anyway, like I said, we'll go ahead and cook these for about 3 minutes per side. And if they feel mushy when you poke them with your finger, let them cook. But when they spring back, they're probably done. And that's it, we'll go ahead and remove those from the pan, from the smallest to the largest. And we'll go ahead and serve that up on some rice, which in my case was some brown rice that I cooked with some turmeric and peas. And while you certainly could serve a sauce with these, like a sweet chili sauce to cut the heat, I'm not going to. I'm just going to finish up with some fresh chives, because I just wanted pure fire, which is exactly what I got. And for what is probably the thinnest coating you will ever see on a chicken, the amount of flavor and spice it delivered was unbelievable. Just incredibly flavorful. And yes, extremely spicy. Which is why I came up with the name Firebird. Allegedly. And above and beyond the taste, that coating really does produce an incredible texture. And I find really does help keep our chicken juicy. I mean, come on, look at that glistening meat. So I really do love this technique for what it does both to the texture and the taste. And while this is definitely very spicy, it is also very addictive. So even though that heat keeps building, you just can't help but take another bite. And I know these things are very subjective, but for me this never went over the top and became painfully unpleasant. It just straddled that line perfectly. But anyway, that's it. What I'm calling Firebird Chicken. And a special shout out to the Blue Koi in Kansas City, where I first came across the name I appropriated for this dish. Maybe one day I'll be traveling through and I can try their version. But until then, I'm just going to have to settle for this, which I really did think came out amazingly well. And that's why I'm going to finish up
by saying I really do hope you give this a try soon. So please follow the links below for the ingredients, a printable written recipe, and much more info as usual. And as always, enjoy. Chicken and olives. That's right, if you like martinis, you're going to like at least half the main ingredients in this. And while this does not have any gin or vodka in it, unlike your precious martini, this is chock full of moist, tender, flavorful chicken. And besides that, it's also very easy, so let me show you how to put this together. In step 1, we're going to season and sear our chicken. So we're going to go ahead and season the skin side with salt, freshly ground black pepper, and some cayenne. And then we're going to go ahead and flip those over. And this is going to be one of the rare times where we're going to season each side a little differently. So the skin side is salt, pepper, cayenne, but the meat side here is going to be a little different. We're also going to put some salt and some freshly ground black pepper and some cayenne, but this side is also going to get seasoned with some herb de Provence. I know we have not used that in a while. And all that is a Mediterranean-style dried herb blend, which of course I'll talk about on the blog. And then once that side has been thoroughly herb de Provence, we'll flip it back over, skin side up, and just leave it there on the counter for about 10 minutes before we sear it, which is going to give us the perfect amount of time to get the rest of our ingredients together. All right, in the industry and on many food blogs, this is referred to as mise en place, but you can just call it getting your stuff together. And what we have here is 2 different varieties of olives. I have the dark, deep purple Kalamata olives, and then we also have these beautiful bright green, large Italian olives called Castelvetrano. And this olive is so meaty and so buttery that I'm going to have to eat one right now. And besides the olives, we're going to need some sliced shallots, some freshly chopped Italian parsley, some lemon zest and lemon juice, and then the secret ingredient, we're going to add a little splash of that Kalamata olive brine. Oh yeah, that's going to do things. All right, so our chicken is seasoned, our mise en place is together, and it's time to sear the breasts. So let's go over to the stove and put a heavy-duty skillet down on high heat with a generous splash of olive oil. And when that's hot, we're going to go ahead and put our chicken breast in skin side down. And we're going to sear this side very well until nicely browned, maybe about 5 minutes. And while I like to start this process on high heat, once those breasts are searing like that, go ahead and back the heat down to medium-high, and we'll just maintain that level of sizzling right about there. And like I said, we're going to give that side about 5 minutes, which is the perfect amount of time to slice our olives. And for the green one, I think we're going to slice it crossed into rings. Proven fact, people love rings. But then for the Kalamata olives, we're actually going to cut them in half lengthwise. So not only do we have 2 different colors of olives, we have 2 different shapes of olives. All right, that doesn't just make it twice as interesting, that makes it 4 times as interesting. Ask any mathematician. All right, so a very subtle knife skills tip, but that is going to look nicer and more interesting if you cut them that way versus cutting both olives in rings or both olives in half. But regardless, we're going to slice up about a cup of olives, and by this time our chicken should be ready to turn. So we're going to flip over those chicken breasts, but this side we're not going to cook as long. All right, we're only going to give this side 2 minutes because we're actually going to finish these on top of our olive sauce. And by the way, the reason we didn't put the herbs on the skin side is because that fatty skin side sears at a higher temperature and sometimes those dry herbs can burn. But on the wetter meat side, that's not a problem, and it also will permeate the flesh easier. But anyway, like I said, we're going to give those 2 minutes, at which point we'll remove those to a plate and reserve them while we make our sauce. And to do that, we're going to go ahead and toss in our shallots. And this pan should be plenty hot, so let's go ahead and back the heat down to medium. But you keep an eye on this and adjust accordingly. But anyway, we're going to throw in those shallots and sizzle those for about 2 or 3 minutes until they just start to soften and brown up a little bit. And then once our shallots have been golden browned, we're going to go ahead and toss in our sliced olives. And we'll give those about a 30-second sizzle in that hot pan. And what I think that does is kind of wake up the flavor in the olive, kind of bring out that brininess. But not too long. Like I said, just about 30 seconds. And at that point, we're going to go ahead and start with the liquids. First up is some chicken broth. We will dump that in, and of course that's going to deglaze and dissolve all that lusciousness off the bottom. By the way, pop quiz, what's that called again? Leave your answers in the comment section on the video. All right, you'll win nothing, but at least trolls will make fun of you, okay? And in addition to the chicken broth, we're also going to squeeze in the juice of 1 lemon. And then last but not least for liquids, after the lemon, we're going to do our secret ingredient, which is a little splash of that olive brine. Oh yeah, that's going to make it nice. And then here's the deal. We're going to raise our heat back up to high because we want this to reduce by about half before we add our chicken back in. And while that's happening, we're going to add a couple more ingredients. The first of which would be some ground cumin. And we'll also add in that freshly grated lemon zest you saw earlier. And we'll stir that in. And then like I said, we're simply going to cook this down till it reduces by about half. And when that happens, it should look something like this. And at that point, I want you to turn your heat down to the lowest setting. And we'll go ahead and we'll add our chicken breasts back to the pan. And we'll finish cooking them gently
on that amazingly flavorful olive sauce, or what will be an olive sauce. All right, so our chicken's in, our heat's on the lowest possible setting, and let's go ahead and cover that. And we'll cook that for about 5 or 6 minutes. That's a wild guess, or until the chicken's cooked through. And then once we have determined our chicken breasts are cooked perfectly, we're going to go ahead and remove those to a plate while we finish our sauce. And the sauce is going to take a couple minutes, so let's go ahead and put a little bit of foil over our chicken to keep it nice and warm. And then we'll go back over to the pan, which is still on low, by the way, and we will add the last 2 ingredients, our freshly chopped Italian parsley, and we're also going to throw in a few chunks of cold butter, and then you know the drill. We're going to keep stirring this and or shaking the pan until that butter disappears, and at that point, your sauce is done. All right, so keep it moving, keep stirring, and as soon as that butter just about disappears, we're going to go ahead and turn off the heat, and we will switch to a spoon because the only thing we have left to do is taste this for seasoning. And you'll notice that other than generously salting the chicken, we didn't add any additional salt to this. But because of the brininess of the olives, you may not need any additional salt. So I gave mine a taste and it was perfect. And yours may be as well, but give it a taste. And once you've seasoned your sauce to perfection, we'll go ahead and spoon it over those chicken breasts. And I'm actually stunned after doing almost 1,000 videos. I have not paired chicken and olives yet, or at least I can't remember doing that. So that's kind of shocking because it really is such a magical combination. But anyway, we're going to spoon over all that sauce, maybe finish with a little more Italian parsley. And that, my friends, is one gorgeous looking chicken dish. And as I tear into this, I'm reminded of an old saying. You don't tell how good a sauce is on a spoon, you tell how good it is on a fork. And what that means is if you taste the sauce alone, it's almost too briny, too intense, too sharp. But when it's coating a chunk of chicken, it is the perfect balance of flavors. And yes, I am recommending you get at least 1 or 2 pieces of olive in every bite. But anyway, that's it, chicken with olives. As you saw, very simple to make and incredibly, incredibly delicious tasting, okay? So I really do hope you give that a try. Head over to foodwishes.com for all the ingredient amounts and more info as usual. And as always, enjoy.
Sausage mushroom chicken. That's right, my favorite kinds of recipes are the recipes that aren't really recipes, but rather a small collection of great tasting ingredients that taste even better together. And above and beyond the proverbial whole being better than the sum of the parts, we're also using one of the all-time must-learn culinary competencies, where we cook something and make a world-class sauce all in the same pan. So yes, very exciting stuff. And if you think you're ready, let's go ahead and get started by placing the sausage in a skillet, set over medium heat. And once panned, what we'll do is poke that on both sides with a fork, which is usually a bad idea, because what happens as that cooks, fat and juices are going to leak out into the pan. But that's exactly why we're doing it, because we're actually going to use that rendered fat to cook our other ingredients. Oh, and if you're keeping score at home, I'm using a sweet Italian sausage, but any pork sausage will work. So we'll go ahead and cook that sausage on both sides until it's cooked through, at which point we'll turn off the heat and transfer that to a plate, where we will let it cool down before transferring it into the fridge. And the reason we want this chilled is because it's going to be way easier to cut. So we'll go ahead and let that cool and then pop it in the fridge. And we will move on to season our chicken breast, which I'm going to do with a mixture of kosher salt, freshly ground black pepper, and cayenne. And what I have here are 2 embarrassingly large, boneless but skin-on chicken breasts, which is very rare because usually they come boneless and skinless. But since I cut these off the chicken myself, I get to eat the skin, which is delicious. But anyway, the point is any kind of chicken breast is going to work here. And what we'll do once that's seasoned up is head back to the stove, where we'll put our heat back on to medium-high, and we will add a splash of olive oil to our sausage drippings, and then proceed to sear this skin side down for about 5 or 6 minutes, or until that skin is beautifully browned, and most of the fat is rendered out, which means the rest of our ingredients are actually going to get cooked in a combination of olive oil, chicken fat, and pork fat. And how's that not going to be amazing? So we'll go ahead and let that sear skin side down, and we could just watch it for 5 minutes. That would be fine. But I actually think we should use that time to prep our mushrooms and sausage. And today I'm going to be using what's called brown beach mushrooms, which kind of look like they come straight from a fairy tale. And all we need to do for these is sort of cut that little pad off the bottom that holds everything together. And once that's sliced off, we can break these up any which way we want. And these used to be hard to find, but now I see them in like all the big stores. But if you can't find them, just slice up some regular mushrooms. And then what we'll do once our mushrooms are separated is go ahead and pull out our now hopefully cold sausage. And now that it's all nice and firm, we'll go ahead and dice it. Although just because I'm dicing doesn't mean you have to. All right, instead of dicing, you could be slicing. I mean, you are after all going to be the winner of this chicken dinner. So you slice or dice this stuff any way you want.
And then by the time that stuff's prepped, that skin side of our chicken breast should be beautifully seared. And we'll flip that over and give the other side just a couple minutes. Okay, because this is actually going to get cooked in the oven. So we don't need to cook it through at this point. And as I pull these chicken breasts out of the pan after a couple minutes, you're going to see they're still raw. And what we'll do is go ahead and set those aside while we prep our pan for the oven. And all that means is we're going to add a diced red onion to the pan, which should be set over medium-high heat. And we can also go ahead and toss in our diced sausage, as well as our beech mushrooms. And by the way, it's B-E-E-C-H. And we should probably also toss in a nice big pinch of salt. And what we want to do is cook this, stirring occasionally, until everything sort of starts to brown up. But keep in mind, this is about to go in the oven with the chicken, so we don't necessarily need to cook these until they're super brown. But anyway, I went ahead and cooked mine in that incredibly flavorful combination of fats, until they looked a little something like this. At which point we can turn off the heat, and we'll place our chicken back in the pan skin side up, along with, of course, any and all accumulated juices. I mean, if you're throwing that stuff away, we're going to have a little chat in the walk-in, which, by the way, is where people get yelled at by the chef in a restaurant. But anyway, once everything's back in the pan, that is now ready to transfer into the center of a 400-degree oven for about 15 minutes or so, or until your chicken's cooked through. All right, you have to figure that part out. But I usually go to about 145 internal temp, and then by the time it sits a little bit, it's perfect. And then what we'll do once those come out of the oven is go ahead and transfer those onto a plate. And we'll just keep those warm, resting for about 5 minutes while we finish our sauce. And we'll start that by doing two things: turning our heat up to high, and even more importantly, placing a towel on the end of our handle. And if you don't, you're going to grab that handle, burn your hand, and then blame me. So very important tip. But anyway, we'll crank our heat to high, and we'll wait till all that goodness starts sizzling, and we'll cook that for about 1 minute. Or longer, if you want that stuff more caramelized. But I thought mine was looking just about right. And then once we are happy with how that stuff looks, we'll go ahead and pour in some flavorful and ideally acidic liquid. And today I'm going to be going with some white wine, but you could also do some chicken stock with a splash of vinegar, or maybe a squeeze of lemon. But no matter which you use, what we'll do is let this cook on high until it reduces by about half. And no, we're not measuring. You just look at it and you ask yourself, is that reduced by half yet? And if the answer is no, let it go a little more. Okay, that's just you cooking. But if the answer is yes, that does look like it reduced by half, then what we'll do is turn our heat down to the lowest setting, and we will toss in some cold butter, and maybe if we want some freshly chopped herbs. Okay, I'm just going with some Italian parsley, but you know all the ones that will work. In fact, I wish I had some tarragon. That would have been amazing in this. And then all we need to do is stir this continually until our butter disappears. And because we used an acidic liquid like wine or some vinegar, that cold butter and other fats are going to get emulsified, and our sauce is going to magically thicken up and get all beautifully shiny. And that's it. Once that butter disappears, other than tasting this for seasoning, our Michelin star quality pan sauce is done. And it is now ready to spoon over our chicken, which I've placed over some roasted mashed sweet potatoes. And I was originally going to use polenta, but then I remembered I had some sweet potatoes. So I decided to go in a more colorful and possibly healthier direction. And even though it kind of looked a little unusual as I was eating it, it ended up being an absolutely fantastic choice. And that's it. I went ahead and finished up with some parsley on top. And I knew going in all this was going to taste great. But it's always nice when things turn out looking amazing as well. And I really did think this came out looking like a gorgeous plate of food that most people would look at and say to themselves, I would like to eat that. Which is exactly what I'm going to do right now. And by the way, I either need smaller chicken breasts or larger bowls. Because I was trying to perform a reach around to grab a mushroom to eat with this first piece, but there wasn't enough space, so I ended up just awkwardly smearing on some sweet potatoes. Which I have to say again, really were amazing. In fact, if you're not into chicken, just roast a sweet potato, split it open, and then top it with this easy sausage mushroom sauce. That would be good. But anyway, that's it, what we're calling sausage mushroom chicken. This is exactly the kind of dish you should make with that friend of yours that doesn't cook, because they think it's super hard. Okay, you make this with them, and they just may change their mind. Which might seem like a small thing, but it's not. It's a huge thing. So whether you are going to share this with a friend who eats most of their meals out, or you're just cooking it for yourself, I really do hope you give this a try soon. So head over to foodwishes.com for all the ingredient amounts and more info as usual. And as always, enjoy.